Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is September 13th, 2017. It's 4 o'clock sharp in the afternoon, and I am so very honored and excited to be able to join with you to be discussing what I think is one of the most important issues in, let's just say, 2010, 2015 time frame in the United States. Today, the issue of discussion is going to be, drug addiction, and specifically in this episode, opiate addiction and opiate recovery. So we'll be interviewing a courageous young man who was raised as a devout Mormon, and his name is Thomas, and he is willing to publicly talk about how being sexually abused as a 5-year-old, about having his brother commit suicide, and about how shaming messages around sexuality and masturbation as a teen, from his perspective, led to drug use, ultimately opiate use, and opiate addiction. That's going to be the main topic. In addition, we're going to be talking about recovery from opiate addiction. And that's, obviously maybe one of the most important parts is not just to talk about the difficult journey, but how to get better. This will be a multi-part series on Mormon Stories podcast. So expect us to be doing additional interviews. If you've got a story about drug use, opiate use, addiction, recovery, we want to consider it. So feel free to email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. As always, one of the ways that we pay the bills with Mormon Stories podcast is to do some very brief announcements, so I'll do really quick. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Mormon Stories. That would be awesome. Please like our Facebook page, Mormon Stories Podcast. And if you're willing to, please give us a positive review on the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page. And if you're even willing to do more, go to iTunes and give us a positive review there. Those reviews are really helpful. Of course, if you value these programs, please consider signing up for a monthly donation at mormonstories.org. Just $10, $15, $20 a month can keep this podcast alive. Very quickly, we have several really exciting events coming up, and some of them are new, so please pay attention. Tomorrow, September 14th and 15th, I'll be in Seattle, Washington to do a Mormon Stories workshop there. Can't be more excited about that. We're going to be doing a really fun party on Friday night in Seattle, and we are super excited. New announcement, October 27th in Utah County, we're going to be doing a workshop on finding spirituality and improving mental health during and after a faith crisis. This is something we're trying new. Instead of just doing, a 2.5-day retreat or some type of workshop in another state, we're going to be bringing shorter workshops to Utah. So again, October 27th, Finding Spirituality, Improving Mental Health During and After a Faith Crisis in Utah County. We're doing San Francisco, the Bay Area, November 9th through 10th. We're excited about that. And then here's the second new announcement. We're going to do a half-day workshop November 17th on healthy relationships within a Mormon, post-Mormon context. So that's healthy marriages, communicating with believing family and friends, raising healthy children, all that sort of stuff. So again, October 27th is the full-day workshop on spirituality and mental health in and after religious transition. November 17th, healthy relationships, half-day workshop in Utah County. You go to mormonstories.org/events to register for those events as soon as that event page is up. Feel free to email us if you have questions. Of course, we're accepting nominations now for events in 2018 at mormonstories@gmail.com. And don't forget the Mormon Stories Cruise to the Bahamas, October 24th through 28th. All right, that is all the announcements we have. It looks like we already have 31 people joining us through Facebook Live. Live listeners, I just want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. And I want to please invite you all to post your questions and comments on the Facebook Live stream, because we would love to have this dialogue be interactive and incorporate your comments and questions into the episode. So without any further ado, grateful for your patience. Thomas, welcome to Mormon Stories podcast.
Thank you, John. Excited to be here.
All right. So I guess I wanted to begin with what was my first question when I talked to you just a few minutes ago, which is, I've never tried drugs. I think a lot of Mormons and post-Mormons haven't tried drugs. Some have maybe tried marijuana, but it's a world that is completely foreign to me. So I'm just going to be honest.
Okay.
I'm coming to you with like complete ignorance. Never tried marijuana, never tried anything. I've never really spoken in depth with someone who is a recovering drug addict about their drug use. So I'm going to be asking you really new and naive questions, and I'm just going to ask your forgiveness in advance about that.
That's fine.
And the first naive question I'm going to ask is, why would anyone, and specifically, why would you be willing to talk about such a sensitive topic in a public forum?
I think that I've struggled with this so long that it's not. I've just accepted that it's a part of who I am, and I would like people to kind of be educated on the reality of drug addiction. There's a lot of misconceptions surrounding that, and maybe I'm kind of an open person anyway, but
I love it. Well, I just want to let you know, I mean, anyone who's paying attention to the news in 2017 will know, or if they're paying attention to their family and friends, that there is a nationwide, I guess I want to say epidemic, correct me if it's a poor use of words, but there's a nationwide epidemic in opiate addiction, both heroin and prescription drug medication. And it's rampant in Utah specifically, maybe even more rampant here than elsewhere. I don't know for sure. Is that your understanding?
My understanding is that there is quite an epidemic occurring in Utah, and that it's a big problem here. I think, I don't know, maybe someone can look this up, but I'm pretty sure that Utah has one of the, a really high rate for abuse of prescription medications, I believe, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, I think that's the case. So thank you so much, heartfelt, for your willingness to tell your story.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, so with that, let's just begin. Tell us about your Mormon background and your background as a child and a teen, just so that we can understand kind of a bit about you and kind of what led to this experience for you.
Yeah. So I come from a very orthodox Mormon family. Both my parents were born and raised in the church. We have
what states were your parents raised?
My father was raised in Washington a little bit, and my mom, I think, just here in California, in like San Diego area.
Okay.
But
and where did they raise you? Where were you raised primarily?
So Southern California is where I've spent my whole life.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And a big family, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have 6 brothers and 1 sister, and I'm the 5th child. So kind of in the middle.
So
there.
A family of 8, is that right? 8 children,
yeah.
Is that right? Okay. And just to be clear, talk to us about the level of orthodoxy in your family growing up before we go back and talk about the things that contributed to the drug use.
Yeah, sure. So we were expected to, attend church every Sunday. All 3 hours was expected. Seminary was required. We had family home evening. Um, it was the whole thing, I guess. I wasn't forced to read my scriptures or anything like that, but my parents lived the gospel uh, very closely, and that's how they kind of centered their family, around the church.
And what were their teachings about word of wisdom growing up?
Well, neither of my parents had any experience at all with word of wisdom stuff. So honestly, John, I don't think they did not ever anticipate actually that they would have such a big word of wisdom problem with their children, for their sons. And so, I don't know, it wasn't really talked about. Um, we weren't allowed to drink coffee or tea, anything like that. But drugs and stuff, we were never like warned against that.
Got it. I'm going to just throw in a quick comment from our listeners.
Sure.
Mark writes, I'm an 11-year police veteran, 6 years in Dallas, Texas, 5 years here in Utah. I find way more drugs here than I saw in Dallas, especially heroin. Now, we should note that in your story, you're growing up in Southern California. I think the point is that this issue is just very relevant to Mormons,
Yes.
which I think is the point.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Okay, so definitely a devout Mormon home where the word of wisdom was emphasized and orthodoxy. So tell us what in your mind, what experiences led to you feeling like drugs were something you wanted to try?
So I think that I guess what's kind of interesting is that at first it wasn't like one day I decided that because of the struggles I had as a child that I needed to go try drugs. There was no conscious relation. Okay, so it wasn't until later, with a lot of therapy and understanding, kind of, just I don't know, just kind of the way my mind has kind of worked and been affected by, my abuse and stuff. Did I learn that there was actually a very direct connection? But really, the um, the being sexually abused part and the effects that had on me were profound. It changed my whole entire life. It made me a different person.
So without going into details, at age 5, you experienced sexual abuse, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
somewhere between 5 and 6 years old.
Okay. And
Um,
how long did that last, or as much as you're aware of?
I'm not certain. Yeah, I'm not even certain how
More
long it lasted.
was it one? So was it possibly just one time, or are you
It
pretty sure?
Yeah, it could have been one time. I'm not sure. You know, some people have experiences where they were abused. Like I have family members who were abused multiple times sexually, or had multiple sexual experiences, and that hasn't done a thing to them.
Yeah.
But then you have some people who have one experience and it affects them differently.
Yep.
Um, so I'm
Absolutely.
not certain, but I know that, I mean, it was very clear how it affected me was very, very evident.
So how did being sexually abused affect you as a child, as a growing child?
So the way I like to describe it is, if you could imagine, you know, a, a, a little child does not think about sexual, there is no word, there is no sexuality, right? There's no such thing. Um, what happened was being sexualized at an age that shouldn't be introduced. My innocence was sort of taken from me. And I just became a sexual being at a very young age. That's how I would describe it. And I just sought out that sexual interaction with other males.
And that's something that is, I hear that people who are sexually abused, well, in some cases become abusers, but what I'm hearing from you is they just start thinking of themselves as sexual beings, or as their worth or identity coming from sexuality, even before they awaken as sexual beings. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so because of that experience, you as a child would seek out people who were interested in that sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah. So other boys. There isn't one friend I can think of. Just when I was a young boy first doing these sexual things, not one of my friends that I would either sleep over at their house, or I was on the soccer team with, or all of my friends I was sexually interacting with. Now somebody might say that oh, it's normal for little kids to play doctor, and it's normal for that sort of experimentation to take place, which is true. But we're talking about an entirely different, we're not talking about just a couple occasions of curiosity. We're talking about having a deep sort of drive, and I mean, it literally was a part of my identity. Does that make sense? It was that other half of myself it was a secret part of my identity, and no one could ever guess. But it was a part of me, and it was important to me.
And was this something you ever got caught doing as a kid, or someone told on you, or your parents found out, or anything like that?
Yeah, I had a couple experiences with my mom or my dad kind of, walking in on me, but I doing something with another boy, but it wasn't, I honestly don't think that I think they just thought it was, boys quit being naughty, it's just like, they thought it was probably just experimenting, but little did they know that it was much, much deeper than that. And it's kind of interesting, John, because everybody who, my whole family and people who knew our family, I was like the angelic child. You would never guess that anything was wrong with me. I hid it very well.
And when your parents found out about this, it was just like a slap on the wrist, or no big deal. Like, I'm wondering, in a Mormon context, why it wasn't catastrophic to them.
I think the mentality was just, oh, these are, they're just little kids. They don't even know what they're doing. They're not, just a little slap on the wrist. It wasn't. I got in trouble, but it wasn't some big topic of discussion. It was just like, don't do that. That's not appropriate. We don't, expose ourselves.
Okay,
to
so
other
at
people.
least from your parents, it wasn't you're evil, you're dirty, you're terrible.
No.
I mean, that's good. I'm just gonna say that sounds positive.
Yeah.
Okay, so and if you're comfortable sharing, did any of the sexual experimentation happen like in a Mormon context, like with Mormon boys at Boy Scout camp, Cub Scouts, or was it with non-members and sort of outside of church context?
No. The church because the church was so involved in my life growing up. I mean, everything you just stated was the case, involved with, other boys at church, scouts. Yeah. Oh yeah. The whole thing.
Okay. Cool. Not cool. I mean, that's interesting.
I get it.
Yeah, that's good to know, and it makes sense, because Mormons tend to hang around Mormons. That's just what we do.
Absolutely.
So how did this grow? Okay, so talk about, I think your brother's passing maybe is the next thing to talk about in the chronology.
Yeah, so I guess it's important to note that that's the sexual abuse and the effects that it had on me. It was not like just in my, really young childhood that I was doing sexual experimentation and then it stopped one day. Not whatsoever. So the whole entire, like, while everything else is going on, this sexual side of me was not only going on, but becoming more intense, more involved, and a bigger problem than it was before, if that makes sense. But when I was 8 years old, my oldest brother was 15, turning 16 at the time, and he took his life, um, and it obviously changed our family dynamic forever. Um, Although I was only 8 years old, we know that you know when something traumatic happens in a child's life or even a baby's life, they are and can be affected, even if they don't remember, specifically, they might not remember a traumatic experience necessarily, and it will still and can still affect them.
But you were 8, so certainly you remember the funeral and that sort
Yeah,
of thing. Yeah.
yes, yeah, I do. I actually received the phone call. Um, I think it was after school one day. I'm not sure, but I received a phone call of a girl. I think she was a friend of my brother's, and she was very panicked, and she was saying, are your parents home? Your brother's hurt. He's really hurt. I need to talk to one of your parents right now. And none of my parents were home. So, but my older brother was, and so he ran out of the house. My brother shot himself at my elementary school, actually, which was right down the street. Um, so yeah. Anyways, but
Is
I
there,
remember.
oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
Was there any indication as to what was tormenting him?
He had severe depression, and depression runs in my family,
Okay.
uh, very much so.
Okay.
And he just, he was the first child. I think that my parents were very much still learning how to properly parent a child, and not be too extreme. I know for a fact that the Mormon values, right, and morals that my parents had stuck by their whole lives, they expected, right, out of their children. And because they never had experience with, like, smoking or drinking, this experimentation, they had no idea what to even do with that. When my older brother started getting into smoking and stuff, they had no idea, and they only reacted in the way that they knew. And I just think they were probably a little bit harder than they certainly have let up a lot now, because they've learned a lot through their children. But
Not in any way to put the blame on your parents, but I mean, we have to look at what factors might and might not
yeah,
contribute, or we don't learn anything from it.
yeah, absolutely.
So you're thinking that the harshness or the rules of Mormonism and the guilt and the shame may be piled on top of maybe a predisposition for depression anyway.
Yeah,
Could have
absolutely.
pushed your brother over the edge.
Yeah, I think he also had just had a change in his antidepressants. Um,
I've heard that.
yeah, yeah. So at least that's what my mom told me. She kind of thinks was kind of contributing to that. So
That's so hard. Okay, so I can only imagine how that might have affected you growing up, huh?
yeah, I just remember it being, you know, uh, it just, I don't think my dad had to really give his attention and support to my mom a lot, because she just basically became dead inside. You know, she couldn't function for a while, actually. Um,
Mm.
and I think that, I don't know, I think for everybody in the family, we could have used more support than we received at that time. But what are you going to do? You know, I'm not saying anyone did anything wrong. I'm just saying, like, you know, how could my parents give as much support as, you know, they themselves were suffering greatly, right? So it must have been hard for them to kind of take care of us as well. And I'm not saying that they neglected us. That's not what I'm saying.
Right. Okay. So how is this? So how is this affecting you as you start entering into your young teen years?
I think that my brother's suicide specifically served as an example to me, as twisted as that sounds. I it 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 told me that, hey, look, this is a way out when feeling tormented, and, you know, if my brother did it and he could go through with it, I could too. Um, and so it kind of served as an example. But on the same token, um, I I always had that when had, you know, when I was having suicidal ideations, I would also kind of weigh in that factor of, you know, if I did this, my my mom would never recover. I mean, with a second child, I mean, my family would never recover. Like, this would just be devastating, um, and that kind of held me back at times as well. Um, so
Yeah. So
yeah,
you saw what suicide can do to parents and to families, and maybe
absolutely,
it made you committed to not following in your brother's footsteps
to a degree. Yeah,
to a
yeah,
degree.
yeah.
Tom writes, antidepressants can lead to suicide and homicide. I would
Hmm.
maybe say be associated with suicide and homicide, or correlate with suicide and homicide, just to try and be technically a bit more accurate.
Right.
Tom writes, the shootings in Springfield, Oregon, and Columbine were by some attributed to antidepressants.
Hmm.
That's interesting feedback from Tom. Raina writes, much love to you, Thomas. Sorry to hear about your abuse and losing your brother.
Thank you, Raina.
So listeners are sending some love and support.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about how, as you start becoming a young teen and progressing in the church as a young adult, as a youth, how the church's sexual messages might or might not have also added fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Yeah. Um, so so prior to becoming a deacon in the church, which is 12 years old, right? Isn't it 12 years old you become a
Yep,
deacon?
it
Okay.
is.
Um, Prior to that, um, I didn't understand the gravity of the sexual escapades, if you will, that I was involved with. Um, I, I could describe it like this. I didn't even know why I was doing those sexual things. It just it felt as if I was born that way, and it was second nature to me. So I didn't know why I did them. I just knew that I did do them. I had to do them. I enjoyed doing them. Um, and it felt good. And I that's all I knew. I didn't, it wasn't like I received some choice where it was like, you know, where I got to like think, okay, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to like become this and I never got that choice. It was just like it was put on me. And when I went into Deacon's Quorum and we started having actual lessons, um, you know, not primary lessons, and you know, uh, when we talk about sort of morality and chastity, and during bishop interviews, right? Because at 12 you really start meeting with the bishop. At least I did in my ward, right? Because deacons can go to the temple to do baptisms.
Right.
Yeah. So it was at this time that I realized that the things I was doing were, in the church's eyes, according to the church, next to murder, in a way. And specifically with masturbation, anytime I would meet with the bishop, one of the main, questions here was, are you masturbating? Do you have a masturbation problem? Now, even though I did masturbate, I was never going to admit it. But what's kind of interesting is that because of that focus on do not masturbate, masturbation is a sin. It's equivalent to having sex with yourself, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I grew up to understand. Because of that, masturbation was the first thing I ever got depressed over. And that's really weird because I had already done so much worse than just masturbating. Sexually speaking, I had already gone much further than that as a child. But because of that emphasis put on do not masturbate, this is a sin, that became a huge source of depression. And I despised myself over it because I couldn't help not masturbating. Now, the other thing that I kind of picked up from the messaging in the church is that I was addicted to masturbating. And it's just bizarre looking back and thinking that I believed that I was addicted to masturbation. That, when we're talking about addiction, we're talking about something that you have that affects the rest of your life, something that you cannot go without. It wasn't like that. So I just
I just want to say that one of the most, I'm sorry to interrupt your story.
No, you're fine.
I worked as a therapist at the Utah State University Counseling Center for probably 6 years, and in one capacity or another, or at least I worked with USU college students for 6 years. 80% of them are Mormon, and I was so shocked whenever a young returned missionary would come in, or a young woman would come in, and they would say, I'd say, hi, thanks for coming. What are you here for? And they'd say, well, I just want you to know I'm an addict. I've been sober for 3 weeks. I'm really fighting this addiction. And then I would say, oh my gosh, what, can you tell me more about your addiction? And they're like, yeah, I go to a 12-step program sponsored by the church. My wife attends with me. I masturbate, and we're laughing, but they were.
No, I know.
Many of these young men and women were suicidal over that label of being an addict, because it's such a shaming,
it's a heavy label
and a charged label.
Yeah.
And you're saying in your mind, masturbating occasionally doesn't qualify in the same category as other types of addiction. Is that true?
Absolutely not. It's a normal part of growing up, and it's just,
But also, like fight the new drug. They like to say that certain parts of your brain light up when you're looking at porn and masturbating, just like cocaine or meth.
Right.
Is it chemically and physiologically the same thing?
From my experience, there was certainly, as a 12-year-old boy, there was certainly a fascination with it, and a pleasure center reward, if you will, but not on the same level whatsoever as drugs.
And I'm just going to say that drugs activate the pleasure centers of the brain just like orgasms do. So yes, yes, they're similar in the sense that both make you feel really good,
Right,
orgasms
right,
and heroin or meth or
right.
whatever. But
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that masturbation has the same effect on the brain as hard drugs,
right.
right?
No, yeah,
Not at all.
absolutely.
Not at
Not at
all.
all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Okay. I didn't mean to derail you. I'm just saying
No, no, no,
this
no.
is a
Thank you.
very serious issue confronting.
Yeah,
We talk about LGBT epidemics in this podcast and in Mormonism, and what we almost never talk about is the severe trial that so many young Mormon men and women face, feeling deep shame and guilt and
yes,
stigma from
yes,
something as innocent and as common
yes,
as masturbation.
yes.
Okay, keep
Yeah,
going. I'm sorry. Keep going.
no, no. Can I kind of add to that a little
Please,
bit?
please.
I you know, I although I giggled, I mean, I personally experienced that too, just at a younger age, that I thought I was just the worst person on earth because I masturbated. So I didn't mean in any way to kind of offend anybody, because I experienced that shame as well. But it's just really sad that so many people, probably almost everyone, okay, because almost everybody has or does masturbate in some form, um, especially when you're going through puberty and whatnot, that we have to make that become such a shameful thing. I mean, my friends and I remember we thought we were all addicts, okay? And we thought, as 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys, and we kind of banded together to have accountability to one another to not masturbate anymore, right? Well, the punishment for if you did slip up was, you know, getting shot with a paintball gun point blank with your shirt off on your back for masturbating.
Mm-hmm.
There was this sort of self-harm thing going on. Like, that's how seriously we took it and how much shame we felt when we did masturbate. And it's just such a shame that that has to be the case. So, um,
That's
one
so
thing
hard.
yeah, it's tough.
I'll just add a couple comments from listeners.
Okay.
Mark writes, as a porn addict and police officer that deals with drug addicts, I find a major factor to addiction in the Mormon community is the demonization and ostracizing of people who may slightly experiment with something, quote, forbidden. Then they feel so dirty or bad for having a drink or looking at a pornographic image and having no one to talk to without being treated like a pariah. It becomes so easy to just go extreme. Super great comment
Yeah,
from Mark. Thank you, Mark.
absolutely.
Dan writes, when my assistant scoutmaster began molesting me at age 11, I had no psychological construct for sexuality.
Wow.
That sounds similar to some of the things you
That's
were thinking and feeling,
mhm.
Thomas. And
Yeah.
then Becca writes, as a mother, I'd rather have a child with a masturbation addiction than an opium addiction. So that's Becca's perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
Thomas, let's get back to your story.
Yeah.
This is great. Thank you.
Yeah. So John, I forgot to mention, before we get too far, that growing up in the church with this drive and desire from my sexual abuse to sexually act out with other males, had me convinced that I was gay. So much that, from the ages of, 5 or 6, although I didn't know what it meant to be gay at that time, but I knew I wanted to carry things out with other males. But from 5 or 6 to um, um, until I was about 17, probably 17 years old, I was convinced I was gay, and because of that, I bore the shame and the guilt and just the hardship of growing up in the church and hearing comments, you know, just people making comments that have no idea what the hell they're talking about. and I'm sitting there, you know, silently kind of suffering that you know, they're talking about me. That's how, you know, that's how I felt. Although I am not gay, I I took those offensive comments as if I was gay in this very same way. I'm I'm actually identify as bisexual, but I was convinced that I was gay because I didn't understand that just because I was sexually and physically attracted to males, just because of that, that didn't make me a gay man. That doesn't make me gay. Um, it was purely from my sexual abuse by another male, that, and being sexually activated by a male, that, you know, that just was instilled in me from a very young age. And even to this day, you know, and now it's taken a long time to come to terms with and be proud of who I am and own who I am in confidence. I've never stated this publicly, by the way, that I am bisexual. This is my first time doing that. But you know, it was just really, really difficult for a long time, and I didn't understand until I was in therapy. You know, when I was 17 years old, that, you know, my therapist telling me that I wasn't gay. And I was like, oh my gosh, like for all these years, I've taken that upon myself like I was gay. But even just being bisexual, I think there are some of the same kind of offensive, you know, things said that even if you identify as bisexual, that are going to be offensive to you. And I don't know if we should get into it later, talking about Prop 8, but
let's not now in your
okay.
story, but unless it affected your journey as a youth, because you were in California when that happened.
Yeah, that was later on, though, after I was
Okay.
already using
Okay.
drugs. We
Okay.
can
Okay.
maybe wait.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got the extra stigma of thinking that you're gay,
Mm-hmm.
and we all know that the church talks about LGBT people in heinous ways sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's just an intense amount to carry as a youth. Your brother's suicide, sexual abuse, all the stigma around masturbation. You like were carrying. You may as well have been Black or Native American, and you would have had, and a woman, and you would have had been carrying pretty much every major shame or stigma that Mormonism carries.
Yeah,
So
that's actually a interesting way to say that. I did feel like I had a backpack of bricks that I was carrying on my back, and that nobody understood me and that nobody could help me. It was a very lonely place to be in. I was convinced, I mean, if people can maybe imagine this, I was convinced for years, you know, maybe until I was about 16 or something, that I was the sole person on earth who was like me. That's what I believed. I thought I was. I mean, I can't describe how lonely that felt. That I believed I was the only person who was like myself, in that I was very sexual, with other males. That I had this masturbation addiction. That I mean, I just, and because of that, I had a lot of self hatred and a lot of, you know, I just felt worthless.
and let's just add that this rhetoric about, you've already mentioned this, that sexual transgressions are worse, you know, next to murder and severity, and all the Spencer W. Kimball miracle forgiveness garbage.
Yes, hate that book.
All that rhetoric is still well alive in Mormon consciousness. You know,
Yeah.
I remember on my mission, when a missionary transgressed, the mission president pulled out the old quote saying, "I'd rather have my kid brought home in a pine box than return home without honor from his mission." You know, that
Unbelievable.
all that rhetoric is, you know, is still
damaging.
very, very much with us. Yeah.
Oh yes, and which is really too bad, and that really makes me conscious about protecting my children. I refuse to let them suffer with that messaging. I think maybe some people take for granted, or maybe just don't really understand how damaging these negative messages are. It's not just like, oh, someone said something that is rude, and you should just learn to brush it off. No, when you're developing as a child, and you are, and when you're involved in the one and only true church, and you're hearing these, this messaging from your leaders and from people you respect and that you look up to, you believe it. You believe what they say is true, and you take it upon yourself as such. So
yeah. So any other stories from your youth or adolescence to just illustrate the burden that you were carrying? Because to use drugs, I'm guessing that it's about self-medication, anesthetizing the pain, and you've already given us a sense for how much pain you were experiencing. Any other stories or experiences in your chronology that you want to share before we talk to what that first decision?
Yeah. I think I would just say, and maybe underline again, that and it's not something that I necessarily feel comfortable getting into extreme detail, but the sexual things that I was involved in from a very young age are some of the heaviest things to ever carry on your shoulders, even though they took place as an innocent child, and I had no idea what was even. I didn't have any idea why I was doing these things, but I just want to, re-mention that these things, I mean, still to this day, bug me. I have a really hard time forgiving myself for a lot of things, and this is what sexual abuse does. I mean, it's a nasty thing, what it does to a developing child, and even to grown adults who get raped, or it's really horrible too. But anyways, those things were a daily source of sadness, of depression, of not wanting to live anymore. And as I went to, and this is leading up to the drug abuse, as I went to junior high and high school, my life sucked more than it ever had in up to that point. Elementary school, John, was, out of my school years, the best time of my life. That's kind of sad. I was liked at my school. I mean, a ton of girls liked me, although I just wanted to be kind of more their friend at the time. I felt popular. I don't know. I felt enough social attention and acceptance that it helped offset the secret side to myself that I felt horrible over at that time. Okay. And so when junior high and high school come around, and my social life takes a dive, that's when it just becomes unbearable, because I don't have any I don't have anybody to connect with, nobody to feel I don't know, I not experiencing any love or affirmations from friends that I was surrounded with when I was younger. Really affected me, and I think I kind of put myself in that situation in starting in junior high. I kind of became introverted, and I became I don't know. I guess I feel like I became inferior to everybody. Like I don't know if it was the hormones, from puberty and whatnot, but I just felt like I slouched into this dark, like lonely place, and I never got out of that all through the rest of my school years. Um, so in in high school, when I was about 16 years old, and it was my junior year in high school, I had about had enough of life. I mean,
Mhm.
I mean, I was so over my life. I
Mhm.
just felt like it was pointless. Um, it'd be 95 degrees outside in California, and every single day I would come to school with a long sleeve hoodie sweatshirt and have my hood on, and I would sit with my head down, my head in my arms, just kind of like this all lunch. I mean, and when we'd have like break times and stuff, I just didn't want to be a part of the world anymore. It was too it was too lonely, I guess. Um, and again, I felt like I was the only person on earth that was like this. So I just I stopped caring to impress um, people who expected, like maybe my parents and I don't know, maybe my teachers, and I just stopped trying to be that good angelic boy who doesn't have any, who doesn't abuse drugs like his older brothers, who doesn't who doesn't talk back to his parents, who goes to church, who um, is a valiant um, uh, member of the church. I was sick of playing that role. I was done.
Really quick, did you try and talk to a bishop about all this and get the bishop's help?
Oh, not no, not until no, not until I was about 17 or
So you
18.
didn't feel safe reaching out to a bishop. What about reaching out to your parents? Was there anything your parents could have done to help you, or did you just feel too shameful to even talk to them?
They they could have, but I just, I know they would have uh, got me into therapy, which eventually did end up happening. But prior to the uh, um, I mean, um, it was too late by the time I ended up getting therapy. As far as using, I was already using drugs and kind of full blown into it before I started receiving therapy. But I
Okay.
just didn't feel comfortable talking to anybody about it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that's hard when a kid doesn't feel safe talking to the people that should be there to help them the most. That's why when I talk to people about parenting, I just always say connection with your child is the most important thing. It's more important than rules, consequences, boundaries, discipline.
I agree.
It's does your child feel comfortable telling you the hard things?
Yeah. Yep.
There's no other important thing in parenting, more important thing.
Oh no, I totally agree, and something positive I can take from my experiences is that I will make sure, if it's the last thing I do, that my daughters feel like they can approach my wife and I and tell us anything. I want them to feel like, we're friends. We have a sort of a friend relationship. We're the parents, of course, but I want them to feel safe in saying whatever they want around us. I want them to have that safe space. And I'm not saying my parents were um, bad people. It's just I they weren't on that level of understanding yet.
Yeah.
Okay, they still had some progressing to do, I guess.
So
But
tell us. So you say that you just decided you're going to stop playing this good boy role. What led to your first time using drugs?
so technically the very first drug I ever ingested was a painkiller.
So it wasn't alcohol or
No,
marijuana.
it was a painkiller.
Okay.
Um,
And how old are you at this point?
I was, well, this was a little bit previous to trying other drugs, so it was like when I was maybe, I don't know, 15.
Okay.
Um,
How'd you
and
how'd you find a painkiller?
it was actually given to me by one of my siblings.
Okay.
Um, and I didn't even,
Do you know where they got it? And it doesn't even matter if it's your sibling. Is it
yeah.
like from a medicine cabinet? Was it their own prescription? Like,
So that was okay. So I should say that in California, the pill epidemic, I believe it's rated as like one of the pill capitals of the United States. And what I mean by that is illegal um, buying and selling of of buying and selling uh, hard drugs in prescription form. Okay, whereas here in Utah, you are not going to, you are not going. It's very unlikely that you will find doctors that are crooked and who are willing to prescribe you anything harder than, Vicodin or Percocet. Okay, but in California, we're talking about we're talking about pills that if you don't know what you're doing, if you swallow this pill, it will shut off your respiratory system.
hmm,
Okay, very very potent, powerful drugs. Um, so so it was easier to come by these drugs, whether it was in somebody's medicine cabinet, whether it was bought off the street. So that's where it came from in
okay.
general. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I just,
Okay.
where do people get these drugs? And it sounds like there are places where doctors are just way too liberal, or just maybe doctors are totally conservative and thoughtful, but family members or friends, if they get access, people just need to be careful. We lock up guns in our society so
Yeah.
that kids don't shoot other kids, or
Yeah. Yep.
maybe opiates are
Yeah.
are things we should consider locking up too, right?
100%. In fact, I would like to say this. Anybody listening who doesn't already know this or understand this, uh, you can bet that if you have any painkillers in your medicine cabinet, that more than likely, um, your child will end up finding out about painkillers because it's so common in the schools and stuff. And if they are curious, or they just want to try them, they're gonna know where to go. And um, you really should not just leave them in your medicine cabinet.
So
Um,
doctors need to be more careful prescribing these things. Patients need to be very careful about accepting them into their home,
yes,
because I'm guessing they're overprescribed and overused. And then
yes,
if you do have them in your home, lock them up
lock
and
them
be
up.
super careful.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because if your child is not experimenting with those drugs or doesn't ever want those drugs, you can also bet that more than likely one of their friends at one point in time will check your medicine cabinet when they're hanging out at your house. I know that sounds crazy, but trust me, that's
Yeah.
it's very common.
Yeah. Okay. So and when you received that pill, what was the context? Why would someone give you a pill? Was it like, hey, try this, or were you like, I'm sad? Why
No,
would why would a pill be
it
given to another person?
it was that, hey, try this.
Hmm.
And I didn't even question. It was
Mm-hmm.
just like, well, I asked what it was,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they said it's it's Vicodin, and I'd heard that name before. My mom talking about Vicodin and how my older brother, my older brothers, would nab my mom's or something like that. I knew what Vicodin was. Here in Utah, people like to call it Lortab. But
What
I
are some of the other names of common opiates? If you have them
so
off the
yeah.
top of your head.
Oh, absolutely. So the weakest or most common ones that you're going to find are Lortab, Vicodin, Norco. And they come in different strengths. People may be familiar: 5 over 500, 10 over 325, 7.5 over 750. These are all different strengths of how much of the opiate is inside of the pill versus Tylenol. And then you go up to Percocet, okay, which is oxycodone. That is a stronger form of the painkiller, okay? And that most people have heard of Oxycontin. Um, that is a very powerful drug. And if you can imagine that, if let's say you got your wisdom teeth pulled out, okay, and you got a prescription of a few Percocets, okay. Now, 5 over 500, 5 represents how many milligrams of the opiate is in there, okay. Taking one of those for just about anybody will make you high. It will make, and some people will get sick because it's so intense. Now imagine that multiplied by 80 or an 80 milligram tablet of that. So instead of 5, 80 milligrams. That's why we're talking about things that can kill you. But that's how potent they make these. Okay.
And what are the names of the 80
Uh,
milligram
um,
dosages?
they Oxycontin extended release
Okay.
is usually
Okay.
what those are called.
Okay.
And then there's Opana, and there's some other ones too, but the
Okay.
ones I state are the most common.
All right.
Um,
So even though 5 over whatever, 5 over 500, is that what you said? Can get you high. Some people are taking 100 and, I mean,
yeah, crazy, yeah,
16 times that amount.
yeah. Is it 5 into 5? 5, 10, 15, 20, 20.
I think, yeah, 5 into 80 is 16. Yeah.
It's yeah, you're right. That's
Yeah.
crazy. 16 times the potency.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
a lot
So
of people
you,
die. So I just took it. I swallowed it.
and I've taken opiates before, like
Uh-huh.
once or twice, depending on the surgery I had.
And how did it make you feel?
I mean, it
Nothing?
felt great. It felt great.
Oh, okay.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I never got addicted. It wasn't ever
Right.
something I never even considered being
You had good
addicted.
intentions. You obviously were using it as it's prescribed.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what was it like for you when you took it?
So some people don't even necessarily feel it very much the first time until they take it the second time. Then their body like kind of recognizes it, and it's like, whoa. But I sure felt it. It was I just I I couldn't believe that this feeling that I was feeling inside of my chest and just in my body was something that I had never known about before, or something that I have never that I had never experienced before. It was just good, and that was my first experience with that drug, and ever since then, I was hooked. Not that I was going to withdraw from just taking one pill, but I was hooked on the feeling that I knew it brought about. So shortly after this first pill that I take, I decided I was going to smoke weed. It was just kind of like, I don't care anymore. I want to smoke weed. I'm going to try smoking weed. And I ended up doing that. And my dad actually ended up drug testing me and catching me. And that was like the first time my parents, I mean, they were devastated because I was supposed to be the child who does not use drugs. I was supposed to be the good child that wasn't going to take that route. So when my dad knew that I had done that, he was always suspicious after that, and I had to be very careful. And I got in trouble many times because I'd get drug tested, many times. But I kind of dabbled around in a little bit of everything, ecstasy, and some over-the-counter medications that you can actually abuse, which parents should also know about those. You can look them up online, but make no mistake, your child doesn't have to get a hold of a prescription. They can go to the store and buy an over-the-counter medication that will get them high.
Like certain cold medicines or
yes,
things like
correct.
that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You'd
Now,
heard of that?
What's that?
You'd heard of that, the cold medicine?
Oh, sure,
right?
sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people make meth out of cold medicine, if I understand, correctly. Real quick, so I'm guessing that maybe one of the big differences between you and me was that you were in way more intense psychological, emotional distress than I was. And so that relief meant a lot more to you than it did to me. I mean, is that reasonable to say?
Yeah. Well, and your relief, John, was physically, right? Because you were taking that medication for physical pain, right?
Right.
Whereas I was experiencing mental pain, and yes, it did relieve that. It did make me happy. Now, it wasn't like right away I understood this idea of, okay, I can take drugs and not feel hurtful feelings and emotions anymore. That it wasn't like I just, knew that right away. It became more apparent to me as I became full-blown addicted that these drugs turned you into a robot, basically. That no sexual drive, you just don't care about sex. You don't care about eating very much. You don't care about if something is stressful or if something sad is going on. You have the answer to that, which is, for me, was an opiate.
Now, how are you getting the money? How are you getting these drugs over time at this age?
So I see at first, prior to my marriage, okay, I got married when I was 20 years old. So the first 4 years of my addiction, the beginning years of my addiction, I wasn't seeking out. I mean, I wasn't on drugs every single day because I didn't come across them every single day. It was more like, whenever a friend had some, or a friend found a hookup, okay, or maybe one of my siblings had gotten some, or maybe I went through somebody's cabinet and I found medication. It was every here and there that I was getting a hold of these pills. I was doing other drugs at the time, but what I knew I liked the most was the opiates. And I wasn't taking them enough to where if I stopped, I was going to withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
Not until literally right before my temple marriage did I experience that level of dependency.
Right. Okay. So you weren't necessarily like addicted at first. Addiction probably takes time and certain frequency of chemical reactions,
right?
To really hook you.
Yeah. Right. To really hook you in to where it's not going to be easy for you to get out of this, and you will likely struggle with this the rest of your life. That's what we're referring to when we're talking about hooking you in.
Right.
So
real quick, Dr. Stephanie Jackson writes, U.S. doctors are trapped by the system when it comes to pain medications, especially those of us who deal with patients with chronic pain. I'd love to learn more, Stephanie, about what you mean by trapped in the system. So, Stephanie, if you want to come on Mormon Stories, I'd love to have you join us. Let's see. Carver writes, people get desperate for money and sell these drugs. And so that's a really important point. one of the ways these drugs get distributed is people who need money sell them to other
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely.
Melissa reminds us that benzodiazepines are also at risk for abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Lindsay, Lindsay says, as parents, how do we see signs in our teenage children that they might be using drugs? Any tips? Any tips for Lindsay, real quick? I don't want to get off your story too much, but
No, no.
any tips for Lindsay? I mean, you were saying
Yeah,
you're wearing a hoodie, you're withdrawing, you're irritable. Anything
yeah,
else you would
yep,
add?
yep. So, so I think that you know, you know your children better than anyone else, and you 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 will have experienced them being a certain way for, you know, many years until they're, a teenager. Usually that's when the experimenting goes on. And I, if you pay attention, you're going to notice something off about your child. Um, Most of the time, they are going to try to do this when they're out at a sleepover, or they are going to be really worried about being actually high in front of you or at home. So most likely, this would occur away from the home, or when it's not around you. But being looking for signs of being withdrawn, or depression, or just being suspicious, maybe trying to avoid you, not look in your eye, um, you know, avoiding talking to you at all. Because when we're high, we tend to think that we are super noticeable when maybe we aren't necessarily noticeable. And so, me, for example, I would avoid at all costs having to talk to my parents. And if I had to, I it, I came off as rushing the conversation, wanting to get away. Um, Now, those are the lighter. Those are the signs of perhaps, like, someone who's dabbling in drugs. Much more. There are other signs that are much more serious for a full-blown addict. Um, but those are going to be more obvious but different. Okay. Um, they're going to be different. I hopefully that somewhat
That's
answered
good.
the
Yeah.
question.
So if they're withdrawing, if they're avoiding connection,
Just acting odd at all, and you can drug test them. I mean, I um I think that it's wise to be sensitive and understanding of your children, if they do slip up or experiment. Um, I promise you, it will not help anything if you know you know just just I don't know, if you just, like, punish them, give them some severe punishment because they experimented. Um,
yeah,
it's normal to experiment, and typically that is a sign that something else is going on that in their life that they perhaps need help with.
yeah,
So
yeah. Good.